All right, so let's take a moment and talk about the current landscape and the major players in today's digital media buying world. Now, we've broken this up into 4 kind of generic buckets here based on the general intent of the medium. So playing off of what Bo talked about of the mediums of yesteryears, think about radio, someone who would be listening. This is someone driving their car, right? They're not trying to find anything about your brand. They're passive. That's a passive entertainment or education. So in today's world, this could be things like ads on Spotify or Pandora versus television, which is today the cord cutters on Hulu, Netflix, YouTube. They're people who are looking to actively being entertained. They're actually watching a show to be entertained. But again, they're still not there to be researching anything about your brand necessarily or product. Those come over into the research and the active and buy intent. If someone comes to Google and they search CrossFit gym near me, obviously they're in an active research mode, which is why this is such a powerful direct response channel, the Googles, the Amazons, the Bings, the search engines, because they are telling you that they have an intent to buy versus some of the more passive channels. Facebook is also a little more passive, but at least you're there to be inspired. You're going to Facebook, Instagram feed because you want to be inspired. Now, as a media buyer, the danger is that we generally tend to fall into one of 2 traps based on our background and just the way we're naturally bent or wired. Some of us tend to love the TV buys because they're sexy, where we have an awareness branding background with big brands tend to spend a lot of their money here. And as a small, medium-sized business, I want to be like the big boys and I want to have a big, sexy TV ad too. But we may be forgetting about we just have some low-hanging fruit that we can just go to Google and have some keyword intent keywords that are high intention to buy. And vice versa, some of us get so addicted to the high intention to buy channels like Google because the conversions and the ROI is so great that we tend to forget about hey, we can actually still be driving awareness and impressions and growing our brand by doing some really cool things in the higher funnel channels.
So digital advertising really started in its core with search. That was one of the first times that you could actually target people online in this specific of a way. So as we get more specific, I think it's a good place to start with that. Now, the interesting thing is if you look through and you understand really how much money is being spent in these channels, Google actually still supersedes Facebook almost 2-fold, right? 40% more ad revenue or ad spending going into that channel. To consider, though, that actually also includes YouTube since it's actually owned by Google. But what is interesting here is that predominantly the most amount of people are still voting with their dollars, which could conclude that that's where people are still finding a legitimate amount of success, like Alex said, in this high intent to purchase medium called Google or search at large, because we are in such a buying mindset when we are in these channels. So the challenge with that is that as that channel has matured and grown, Google specifically, competition has also increased with it. And so Google, rightfully so, can charge more money for that advertising than they used to, say, back in 2000. So it comes back down to basic supply and demand. Ultimately, the demand has gone up. Google only has a limited amount of supply, believe it or not. And so they can charge more for advertising within their platforms than they used to back in 2000. And in theory, as brands, we can invest more into those channels because if we have a well-built funnel or a well-built conversion process, we can in turn still monetize off of that traffic if done appropriately. Moving on to the second medium, Facebook, and really ultimately Instagram, because Facebook owns it, it's important to consider what this intent of this channel is, right? People are browsing this to really chase away boredom while they're waiting for their coffee or be entertained, or maybe post something political. But I think the interesting thing about these is if you think about it in terms of the utility is you're not buying against a keyword, say diaper bag, you're actually buying against a audience or someone that you can segment. So you can actually go into Facebook, target new moms that have become a new mom within, say, the last 6 months, and you're getting to the same end goal or end user maybe in mind, in that case through an interest segmentation versus a keyword segmentation. And I think that's an interesting thing to process as you put together your paid media plan. What's equally interesting is the amount of people that are on these channels every day. Across the internet, from a daily active user standpoint, both of these platforms have a huge amount of audience to buy against. Something to consider though, as many headlines as Instagram makes, Facebook still has 3 times, actually more than 3 times active users on the platform every day. And so if you're buying against a big audience, that's something to consider and just something to kind of think about in your media mix. The good news is because Facebook does own Instagram, you can actually use those same audience sets within both platforms and actually buy, for all intents and purposes, the same audience. I would just caution you to try to vary the creative that you use for Instagram specific creative where you have the creative horsepower to do so.
So a lot of us forget that we actually can advertise on Amazon, and that Amazon, at the end of the day, it actually is a search engine just like Google. Now, I actually remember back in 2008, a brand telling me, or asking a question, a brand owner asking, hey, why do I need to be on Google? My brand's been doing fine for 20, 30 years. Why do I need to be on Google? As laughable as that may seem to us today, that really was the reality for the first several or even 10 years after the invention of this thing called a search engine and the internet, that a lot of more traditional, bigger brands didn't really grasp. If you sell a physical product or you're an e-commerce brand and you're not on Amazon, you've already missed the boat. The time is now to get there as soon as you can. In fact, this is a quote from back in 2014. Eric Schmidt is actually retired now. At the time, he was the chairman of the board of Google, and he saw it coming. And back in 2014, he said, hey, look, our biggest competition is, it's not Bing, it's not Yahoo, it's actually Amazon. And this has come to fruition. So today, 59% of consumers actually start their search on Amazon if they're looking for a physical product. They don't go to Google to look for it, they go to Amazon. So this means that if you're not there, they're buying from your competitor. And even if they aren't buying through Amazon, they're going there to find reviews, to learn about your brand. So they may still come back to your own website, or they may buy offline if you sell in retail. But even from the standpoint of your brand education and educating your consumers, you need to be there. Additionally, we can advertise on the platform. So a lot of brands tend to think of Amazon as being a retailer, especially big brands, right, that are used to filling POs to their retailers like Walmart. They kind of bucket Amazon into that same category. I would argue that Amazon actually should be a channel that your in-house media buying team should be advertising. Traditional retailer like a Walmart, you don't get to walk into their store and change the layout of their shelving and how they're talking about your product. With Amazon, we actually can do that by buying ads. There's a couple of ways that we can advertise on the platform, and this depends a little bit if you're selling on Amazon as a seller on Seller Central or through Vendor Central, which is a little more in the weeds and outside the scope of this training. But for now, let's talk about the main 3 ways that you can advertise on the platform. The first is through sponsored product ads. Now, these are very similar to buying ads on Google. And they're keyword based. Someone searches for tennis shoes, you can have ads on above the organic search results for your product, the tennis shoes that you sell. They also have headline search ads, which are a little more prominent. There's going to be more they're searching for your brand. They're coming and they're searching your brand name. It's a great place to have very top of the page, a headline search ad. And then lastly, product display ads. So this is going to be an image, like the name would suggest with display. This is going to be an image of your product, and you can actually conquest other brands. You can target their SKUs on Amazon and have your product show up on their detail pages. Okay, now going outside just those search engine results page of Amazon, there's actually a whole other ecosystem that a lot of advertisers still aren't aware of called the Amazon Media Group. Now, this is generally reserved for larger media buys. So only right now, it's mostly larger brands are doing this, but there actually is the opportunity, even for small brands, to be leveraging Amazon's data through their program called the Amazon DSP, the demand side platform, that you can actually be taking Amazon's first party data based off their users and things they're searching for on Amazon, and then target those users across the web through other websites, other sites that are owned by Amazon, like diapers.com, IMDb. There's a lot of sites that a lot of people don't realize that Amazon actually owns. You can be running ads on all those sites as well. And you can even be driving that traffic back to your own website, even if you don't want to be selling on the platform.
So LinkedIn has actually continued to grow and mature as a platform itself. The amount of business professionals that are on it and the amount of advertising opportunities has grown tremendously over the last few years, even just bringing video into the platform itself. The majority of folks, as they talk about LinkedIn, or maybe say you have actually tried some advertising with LinkedIn, it is quite honestly expensive, but the lead quality that comes through being able to target professionals that are interested in your product or service is quite high. And so it really depends on how well built your conversion assets are as you bring people into that. So something to consider. The other thing that's interesting right now is that organic reach is actually quite high currently in LinkedIn, and that those days aren't going to last forever, as the trend would tell us. So to get good at both organic and paid in LinkedIn is something that if you serve businesses at all, I would recommend putting at the top of your priority list today. So I'm lovingly calling this the shiny object category. Monthly, if not weekly, there's a new channel or new medium or new app or something that we have as advertisers an opportunity to advertise within. And I don't think that's a bad thing. That's just the nature of innovation. And I think as you think about or see headlines about new things to check out, I would definitely do them. An easy way to do that is just to set aside a portion of your budget towards experimental, right? A channel, a set amount of budget set aside that maybe you don't expect a direct return on, but you want to set aside for learning about these, because as history would tell us that these mediums continue to grow, and then maybe they're underpriced for a time, and then eventually they get right-sized. Maybe a good example of what this would be like, say, TikTok. TikTok's something that's talked about right now, or Snapchat. Those types of things all have a level of focus on them right now. What's interesting is within experimental categories, that if we were to rewind a few years back, there was probably someone at some point in time that didn't think Facebook was a legit place to advertise. So if you're early to the race in these places, guess what? You're going to be buying the cheapest advertising probably ever in that platform. And as history would tell us, that advertising only gets more expensive with time. And so if you have a certain amount of your budget set aside for testing these channels, the good news is, if you get in early, you understand the return that you're getting in from that investment, you will likely be buying that advertising at a pretty efficient cost, which is a great thing. And so this has been called arbitrage, or buying traffic at a cheaper rate than you normally would. And so if you get ahead of that, then only good things can happen for your brand. Now, these things come in waves. So Google at one point was actually relatively cheap, if not really cheap, to buy ads in. And now I would say it's more right-sized. Facebook at some point was actually relatively cheap, if not really cheap, and now it's more right-sized in terms of the return that you're getting from that inventory or from those advertising dollars that are spent. So I would highly encourage you to definitely set aside an experimental category and to have a dedicated amount of your time testing out some of these new platforms as they come and go.
All right, so let's take a moment to talk about programmatic, which you may have heard that word thrown around in the last couple of years. It's kind of become a buzzword, so to speak, in the digital marketing advertising space. You might have also heard it referred to as a DSP, which is a demand-side platform, or RTB, real-time bidding. Lots of acronyms and a lot of stuff going on in this space in the current ad tech world. Just this slide alone, don't freak out. Its intent is to show you how complex this programmatic world really is. This is a Lumascape provided by a display Lumascape specifically of the landscape of just programmatic display. You can see there's lots of logos going on here, right? But all this is really trying to say is how you marketers can get their ad all the way over to the publishers, the media, the ways that the marketers on one side of the equation and the publishers, the ones that are actually selling the ad inventory. So think of CNN or ESPN selling a display ad on their website, all the ways that in between there in that exchange that the buying process takes place, right? So we've got all the way on one end, all the different agencies that are negotiating these deals, that are running ads for brands. You've got trading desks, DSPs, exchanges, ad networks, social tools like Facebook, the list goes on and on. Really, all we're trying to say here is that with ad tech, we've actually been able to simplify this process where it wasn't really that long ago in history, even the early 2000s after the invention of internet, where media buying had to be done by IOs, insertion order. This was a manual process. You had to pick up the phone. You had to call ESPN and say, hey, I want to buy a homepage takeover. How much is that going to cost? There's lots of negotiations that go back and forth. In fact, even the early days of Google were done on IOs. You actually had to pick up the phone and call Google to take an ad even for a search ad in the early days of Google. Now with the power of technology through ad tech, all of that happens in real time. That's real-time bidding. So it sounds complex. Really all that is that you've got an advertiser who wants to run an ad on display ads on a network like the Google Display Network. In real time, you're competing against other competitors, other advertisers for that same impression. So you're targeting an audience. Okay, I'm targeting women aged 25 through 30 that like baby bags. Let's say you have a very specific audience. You're also bidding against other advertisers for that same person on that individual impression. So in real time, there's an auction that takes place based on how much you're willing to pay versus all the competitors for that same person are willing to pay for that same impression. And at the end of the day, which ad actually gets shown on YouTube or Facebook or whatever channel you're bidding on is going to go to that highest bidder. All right, so let's pull all this back together and go back to what we started with, which is the CVJ, and look at how all of these different channels line up across the CVJ and how you could be using each channel across a customer's user journey with your brand. Starting at awareness, these are going to be those channels that have a lot of reach, that you can be reaching a lot of people. So that's going to be those demand side platforms like DoubleClick or the Trade Desk to be getting lots of impressions. This is great for video, YouTube. You could be doing Spotify ads. This is really where your top of funnel awareness ads are being run. And you can also use Facebook for that. That's the cool thing about some of these channels. You'll notice they pop up multiple times throughout the CVJ. You could be using video ads on the awareness stage within Facebook, but then also retargeting people who, let's say, viewed 75% of that video. Now we're going to engage with them again on Facebook and cross-platform, AdWords, Bing, based on people who saw that first ad, and retarget them with our lead magnet or a landing page with a cookie so that we can now again retarget them with our actual offer, with our tripwire conversion point. A lot of channels that are great for conversion. Amazon we mentioned, especially if you're on e-commerce, but really any channel can be used on the conversion point because at this point you're just retargeting people based on what they've already interacted with on your brand. Facebook is great for that excite stage and that post-purchase thank you ad that we talked about and the Bo gave examples of, because the average Facebook user uses the platform 1 to 3 times per day. And that thank you message is something you really want to get out quickly within the first few days after purchase. And so that makes Facebook a great place to do that. Now on Ascension, this is going to be usually those cross-sells, upsells that we talked about, dynamic product ads, carousel ads. So for e-commerce brands, Google's great for that because Google Shopping, you can use carousel ads. And on Facebook, you can also run those dynamic product ads like Bo showed examples of. Now lastly, advocate and promote This is great for video, so that lends well to Facebook and YouTube, because you're going to be asking them for something. You're going to say, hey, would you leave us a review, or would you create a piece of content for us, a piece of user-generated content about our product, our brand? That really lends itself well to video, because you're going to be asking that question to them. That's a great place, especially for the founder of the company or the face, so the spokesperson of the company, to be making that request through video.